live. And so hello, welcome to the latest in the Facebook Lives that we're doing here at the Marshals Museum. I'd like to thank everybody who is showing up and getting a chance to come in and learn more about the Marshal Service and everything that we have going on here at the Marshals Museum. But one of the things that we're wanting to do, we started this last week talking with the Chief Historian at the United States Census Bureau. We're continuing that this week talking to Sylvia Bruner. She is the director at the Jim Gatchell Memorial Museum in Buffalo, Wyoming. And so we're going to be continuing to talk about these stories. But what I am going to, before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody that here at the Marshals Museum, if you want to support programs like this, if you want to help support us as we continue to move towards the future to hopefully be able to share all of our stories with the rest of the public here in the museum building. Don't forget, we have our Buy a Brick campaign. We also have a lot of other donor opportunities that you can come in with, whether you just want to donate cash on its own, or if you've got other things that we have that you are interested in. Casey's going to be dropping some of those links here in the chat stream, so you can catch those either now or if you want to come back and listen to this conversation a little bit later. Keep in mind, all of our previous Facebook Lives are available through our Facebook page, and make sure that you also go to check out our YouTube channel where we have some other longer form stuff that we have going on, including the latest in our lecture series on civility. So I'm going to go ahead and we will get back into the conversation itself. And Sylvia, if you could please tell us a little bit, just wherever you wish, about the Gatchell Museum and what it is you guys do, but then I want to definitely talk more about the Johnson County War.
Okay, two of my favorite subjects. So thank you for having me and for having the Jim Gatchell Memorial Museum as a part of this. This is really fun. We're located in Buffalo, Wyoming, and for folks who haven't been here, it's beautiful, and it's also a long ways from anything else. We're in northeastern Wyoming. Jim Gatchell was a pharmacist in our little town starting in 1900. He was also an amateur historian, and he started collecting items. And so our museum was founded on his original collection, which his family donated to the county after he died in 1954. Now, in the 60 plus years that we've been operating as a museum, that collection and the facility has expanded many times over. So it's Johnson County based. That's our mission statement, but there was a lot that went on in Johnson County. And one of the biggest stories is definitely the Johnson County Cattle War. There have been a lot of really bad movies and TV series kind of based off of this basic story, which is a bummer because the truth, the things that really happened, is better and far beyond what you can come up with in a Hollywood movie. I'll try to go over that really quickly. It's a huge story to try and condense, but if you go back to your beginning, the setting, you're talking 1870s, 1880s in Wyoming, which was not yet a state, it was still a territory, so it was open in every sense of the word. There wasn't much in the way of settlement. You didn't have much in the way of law or law enforcement. The Transcontinental Railroad had just been completed, so people were able to get here. It was a great opportunity for people running cattle, and folks started to see that. They could run the open range, they could take advantage of the good grass, water access, et cetera, and be very successful, make a lot of money. So you had operations that began like that. We eventually start to call those people the cattle barons, because they tended to be wealthy. Many of them also came from Europe, and many of them never even came to Wyoming. They ran their operations by just hiring people to do all the work for them here. So that brought in a lot of cowboys. Things really started to change. You had this great success story for a number of years, and then the weather started to change. Summers were dry, grass wasn't as good. And then the winter of 1886 and 87 was devastating. Apparently one of the worst type of winters on record. Super deep snow, really cold temperatures. The cattle losses from the weather, I mean, people estimated it was somewhere around 80 to 90%. So devastating losses. That caused, obviously, a financial loss in that direct effect, but it also meant that a lot of these cattle barons didn't need to employ as many cowboys as they had been. So they started letting go of guys, and they also started blacklisting them. They were telling them that they could not go out on their own and get cattle and start their own operation because they would be in direct competition with the cattle barons. The political setting that's all involved in this too was very strong. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association was a real mover and shaker at the time, and all of the Wyoming Territory politicians, basically all of them, were involved in the WSGA. So you kind of had this one group of people who had very similar interests in mind, and they were literally creating and laying out the framework for laws in the state of Wyoming, or what would become the state. So a lot of people didn't take to that very well. All of these cowboys that had suddenly lost their jobs, maybe they want to stay in the area, and they just basically flaunt their directions and say, you know, forget you, I'm going to start my own herd. Whether that was by rustling, stealing cattle, or by honest means of purchasing, that's still kind of, you know, to be determined, I'm sure, on a case-by-case basis. Johnson County did not legitimately have a really severe issue with rustling during this time period, but it did have some residents that were very outspoken, including Nate Champion. He had been a cowboy employed before. He struck out on his own, and he even was the person behind creating his own livestock association. So that was in very direct competition with the WSJ. And he started holding his own cattle roundups in the spring and the fall. That led to just an explosion of confrontation and contention. So to take care of this problem, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and the cattle barons, they hit the media first. So they started kind of producing this propaganda about how lawless Johnson County was, how bad the rustling was, et cetera. They created a list of people that they specifically wanted either killed or scared out of the area. They wanted them gone. And they thought that they could basically return to how it had been, 10 years previous, back to their success. And that didn't fly at all. People resisted, people fought back. And we're really condensing this into a very short narrative because this is a longer time period than we tend to talk about. The first killings really started in Sweetwater County, so in the southwestern part of the state with James Averill and Ella Watson. There were about 11 people eventually that were killed through this whole thing. Nate Champion and Nick Ray are probably the two best known. When the WSGA really formed a plan, they created an invasion. So now we're calling this group of people the invaders because they hired gunmen, mostly from Texas, but there were some from other states. And they formed kind of a posse. They came up via train to Casper, and then from Casper, they rode via horseback. All of these men were fully equipped with firearms, clothing, saddles, etc., and they were promised a dollar amount per head, the person that they killed that was on that list. And then they were coming north to Buffalo. It was kind of the epicenter for the invasion. They didn't make it to Buffalo. They were going past the Casey Ranch. Now it's the town of Casey. At the time, it was just a little ranch cabin. And Nate Champion and Nick Ray were staying there. It wasn't their ranch. They just were staying there for a night or two. So they stopped. They diverted specifically to kill Nate Champion. And they did, but he held them off and it took all day. And that delay in time allowed for the townspeople of Buffalo to be notified that there was this armed invasion coming forward. Everybody kind of grouped together. They formed their own little posse of people, well armed, and they started riding south to meet. They ended up meeting at the TA Ranch. They had a 3-day siege standoff out there. A lot of bullets flew back and forth without a lot of success. Apparently both parties were just far enough away to kind of be out of real danger. There were a couple of wounds and injuries. And the WSGA had gotten word about this, knew that they needed to put a stop to it. The townspeople were going to outlast the invaders because eventually the invaders were going to run out of food and supplies at the ranch. So they managed to get the local military involved, and there was a group sent out from our Fort McKinney post here, and they went and they arrested the invaders. Now, the military wasn't happy to be involved, and kind of rightfully so, because this was a civilian matter, it wasn't a military matter, but they had literally received their marching orders, so they went, they arrested, basically rescuing all of these men. So they were formally arrested, they were held at Fort Fetterman, Douglas, Wyoming first, and then they were moved down to Cheyenne, Fort D.A. Russell, what's now F.E. Warren Air Base, and they were eventually all let go. It took a long enough time, though, and this was very intentional from the perspective of the WSGA, that they basically bankrupt Johnson County, because Johnson County, as the arresting authorities, Johnson County was on the hook for the expenses of all of these almost 50 men and their keep while they were in jail. And Johnson County couldn't afford that. It ended in a very lackluster way, basically didn't go to trial. Nobody was ever actually brought to any kind of justice or receiving any kind of sentence. And there have been a bunch of books and movies written and made about it, and it's still a very interesting topic.
Yeah, it's one of those things that the more you read up on the Johnson County War, the more you realize that somebody really should make a new, film or something. It's ripe for the plucking to come in and make something new about this particular story, just because of the number of people who are involved and the personalities and all of the different factions. But specific to our interest in this, I know that during much of the buildup leading into the invaders, a character who won't be a stranger to anybody who's interested in the Marshals, Frank Canton. He was, tell me what you know about him. I know that he was the sheriff up there, but he was also cross-deputized as a deputy U.S. Marshal for the District of Wyoming.
So Frank Canton is a very interesting character, and I know this much of his, so I'm just going to be very honest about that, but he was very pivotal to Johnson County, and especially during the Cattle War. So this is probably my favorite photograph of him because it looks very...
That's the standard picture of him, yeah.
Yeah. This photograph is him with his wife, Annie, and their daughter, Ruby. So he wasn't Frank Canton, and most people probably know this if they've read a little bit about him. He was really Joe Horner from Texas. When he was here in Johnson County, he told everybody that he was Frank Canton, that he was from Virginia, and nobody really knew any better. But that was all a lie, and it was a lie because he was a fugitive. He and the gang he rode with, which I guess included some of his siblings, they committed burglary, attempted murder, assault and battery, cattle theft. He did murder a Black 10th Cavalry trooper during some kind of running gun battle. He was convicted multiple times and he escaped multiple times. So he had escaped after, I think, 2 years of actual prison time. He was on a work detail, I believe. He made it up here and he was never caught again. So he was here by 1881 and he was employed by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association as a stock detective. However, funding for that kind of position apparently started to kind of dry up. So by 1888, he was running for Johnson County Sheriff and he was successful. He was the sheriff for a term, and then he lost during the next election to Sheriff Red Angus, who was, by all accounts, probably his most personal, bitterest enemy. He had no respect.
Kind of funny how that happens sometimes.
Canton seems to have taken his loss during that election very personally. And it's really ironic when you actually start to look at his history and how untruthful and unscrupulous he was, that he was on this high horse judging the townspeople for not re-electing him. But he thought that he was a really good sheriff. He thought that Sheriff Angus was a very poor sheriff. I mean, if you look backwards at their statistics, they actually seem to do about the same kind of job when it came to convictions that stuck and prosecutions. So he had a very high opinion of himself.
Okay, and then, but he ended up being in charge of the Stock Growers Association, ended up putting him in charge of the invaders or regulators, depending on which side of the story you're on.
Pretty much, yeah. I think he and George Wolcott was one of the other invaders, and they butted heads quite a lot as far as who was in charge and exactly what the plan was. But yeah, he held a pivotal role directly for the WSGA. And so when you stop and think about that, you know, he had already made his home in this area, and he's meeting up with a group of people in Casper and then riding back to his home to kill people that he knew, people he had interacted with. Maybe a number of them he had a personal issue with, I don't know, but just really an outrageous kind of situation.
Yeah. And then the invaders themselves, I know that they were hired mostly out of Texas, and I know that at least two of the names should be familiar to people who are from the Fort Smith area. Those would be Frank Barling and Jerry Barling. Frank and Jerry Barling were with their brother Bob Barling. All three of them at one time or another served as Deputy U.S. Marshals out of the Western District of Arkansas here in Fort Smith, or out of the Northern District of Indian Territory. That was Bob Barling. He ended up later working, while he was working there, was working with Bass Reeves, a famous Deputy U.S. Marshal from this area. But Frank Barling and Jerry Barling and Bob Barling, they were all three, as well as their siblings, grandchildren of Aaron Barling, who established the town of Barling, Arkansas, on the eastern edge of Fort Smith. And so you have this crazy story of these guys who had been deputies, were bumming around in Paris, Texas, and were approached to come do this job up in Wyoming. We'll give you guns, we'll give you a horse, all you gotta do is come up here and shoot up some people. And they went and they did it, and they ended up showing up there and involved in the fights at the TA and at the KC.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
I thought about this. I haven't thought about this for the Barlings directly, but I have thought about this a lot in regards to one of the other invaders, a man named George Denning. We have his confession, his handwritten confession here in the museum collection, but you can also read it in the back of this book, The Banditti of the Plains. And why I bring that up is because I think for a lot of these guys, probably including the Barlings, because they had what seems to be a reputable history prior to this. You know, they weren't gunslingers or somebody that was on the hook for murder or anything like that. They weren't being given a terribly honest story. So these guys were sold a bill of goods about what this job entailed. When you look at the newspaper articles and things that were really being promoted by the WSGA at the time, they were making everybody in Johnson County out to be lawless rustlers, cattle, horse thieves, etc. And I'm sure that's the same kind of story that they sold to people like the Barlings. So they kind of got in over their heads, to be honest. You know, they signed up for this. And what's really interesting is for some of these men, as the events progressed, they started to catch on. And they realized that they weren't actually okay with what was happening. George Denning may have been one of those guys. It's hard to tell because he was arrested. He was the only guy arrested and held at the Johnson County Jail. So it's a lot easier in retrospect to say that, you know, he never intended to do anything bad. But men like Hardwinter Davis, he was a rancher in this area. He was originally on board with this whole plan. And the more he learned, the more he decided that he just could not be. So he sent his wife and children off to the East Coast for their protection. And eventually he left the area himself because he knew by backing out, he was going to become a name on that hit list. But I've always kind of wondered for people like the Barlings, what exactly were they told to get them to sign up for this to start with?
Right. Yeah, that's always one of those questions that we as historians, I know a lot of people who come to museums, they want to see the stuff, they want to see the physical materials, and us as historians, we want to look, okay, where's all the documents? Where's the letters? Where's the papers? Where's the contracts? We want to see all of the two-dimensional stuff, and a lot of our visitors want to see the three-dimensional stuff.
We want to know why. You know, it's far too easy 100 years later to just judge actions, but without knowing everything that had led up to it. What were people thinking? What were people being told? What was
right? Right. Yeah. And speaking of stuff, though, with the Barlings, I think you and I talked about this at one point. About 6 years ago at Morphe Auctions, and if anybody wants to search this up, they can search this up online. Jerry Barling's Colt revolver that was taken from him after the siege at the TA Ranch. The military gathered all of the firearms, and one of the rarest things ever occurred with an arrest. They recorded the serial numbers on every single gun. So there's a list of all of the guns that were taken from these invaders or regulators. And Jerry Barling's revolver showed up at Morphe Auctions in 2016. 4 years ago. It went for $43,000 at that particular auction, and it's one of those things I wish we would have had an opportunity to be able to go in for it. That would have been an awesome piece in our collection. Related to that, I know that something that you and I were talking about also was the one, and you mentioned him, the one deputy to have passed away, who lost his life as a result of the Johnson County War. Was George Wellman. He was murdered from ambush on May 10th, 1892. And I believe you have a certain something on your desk right now that you could show people who are watching right now.
Yes. So George Wellman, I think he was only 33 when he was murdered. And this pistol, I can hold it where you can actually see it here.
That is a great shot of that. If you can hold it up a little bit higher, there you go. That is a great shot of that revolver. So
this is, by all accounts, George Wellman's revolver. Grab my information sheet. So it's an 1878.
Yep.
You can kind of tell, hopefully, by the video, these are mother of pearl pistol grips. 45. It has, I think this is called a bird's head style grip.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that particular kind of a curve on there, that's bird's head style.
And it also has the little lanyard swivel on the bottom, which I guess is terribly common at that time.
Go ahead.
Fairly good shape. You can see a little of the nickel finish has worn away over the years. But it has a very, very fun, well, not fun for George Wellman, but very fun story for us. Put that back down. So Wellman is kind of one of those interesting characters because he didn't really do anything during the cattle war to gain him notoriety or to put him on a hit list. And apparently he really wasn't, but it was kind of this convoluted story over a number of decades before people kind of figured out what had happened. So let me show you a photograph of him. This is George here, and I think this was taken pretty shortly before his death. So he was from Canada, but he'd been in this area in Wyoming since at least 1880, and he worked on ranches. He worked specifically on the Howe Ranch. And he was quiet, he was well-liked, he was very active with the local Masonic Lodge here in Buffalo. His only involvement that I'm aware of is in the cattle war, is that he helped Hardwinter Davis, the man that I mentioned earlier, who kind of backed out of his involvement and left. He helped him to leave the area, and he helped newspaperman Ed Towles do the same thing. So certainly by doing that, he probably wasn't, the most popular guy for the WSGA's perspective. From the townspeople's perspective, he worked for one of the really big cattle ranches, the Howe Ranch. So maybe he wasn't the most popular there, but it also seems kind of disingenuous to think that people were judging him that harshly because he does seem to have been quite well liked and well spoken of. Anyway, so he left the area here went to Wisconsin, married his sweetheart Martha on April 21st, and then returned. He left Martha in Wisconsin, but he came back. He was made the foreman of the whole ranch because the foreman previous had been arrested as one of the invaders.
Yeah.
It was Frank Laberto, I believe. And he was also made a deputy U.S. Marshal. On May 10th, he and another man, another employee of the whole ranch, left. They had just distributed payroll to everybody. And he was on his way to meet Marshal Joe Rankin. They were ambushed along the way. He was shot in the back, one shot, and he was dead. Apparently it severed his spinal cord, so he didn't suffer any, at least. Hathaway was the man that was with him. And according to him, his horse bucked him off, and he had to go run his horse down. His horse spooked at the gunshot kind of thing. But then he managed to escape, riding to Buffalo, tell the sheriff, etc. Hathaway's story kind of changed time and time again in this retelling. And sort of both sides of the factions involved in the cattle war tried to kind of blame the others. So you had people from Buffalo saying that Wellman must have been killed by the WSGA because he was well-liked in town. You had the WSGA, primarily Charles Burritt, who was a lawyer here working for them, claiming that nope, he was killed by a red sash gang or rustlers who were trying to, continue the friction in the killings. It kind of seems after years and years had gone by, he was probably killed over more of a personal grudge by a man named Ed Starr. There were 3 men involved. And it seems that they had literally drawn straws as far as who was going to actually pull the trigger, but they had seen this opportunity, and Starr had a personal issue with Wellman, and he shot and killed him. Not directly for any purpose relating to the Johnson County Cattle War, but they probably figured out it was going to be a pretty good cover to get away with it, and they did. Nobody was ever brought to any kind of justice in his murder either.
Yeah, because I know that of those 3 that you named, they all just, I think Starr went to Montana, and one of the guys went down to Indian Territory, and just everybody was like hoping to get away and not be found, and they ended up all getting found anyway. And then I know that there's a story on that particular revolver that it was found in a flour can. Is that gun that one, or? Yeah,
so apparently, this is a story that was told by one of the 3 men to another person and then to another person. So I'm sure there's some things that have been a little bit lost in translation. But what we do know is that the gun was found by a sheep herder in the area, a man named Joe Potts. And he found it, I think, in a baking powder biscuit can.
Oh, okay.
It was kind of in a rock cairn, a pile of rocks that are used quite often for usually trail markers through the area. But he found it, pulled open the can. According to him, there was some remnants of some paperwork in there too, but it had fallen apart from age, insects, that kind of thing. But the pistol was in there, and it was in really good condition. So he thought, finders keepers, this is super cool. And he took it and kept it. And apparently, people may have seen him with it, but possibly kept quiet for a number of years because they didn't want to be associated with Wellman's murder. But eventually, by 1935, it was identified, and there were still a number of people around that recognized it. And I guess the lanyard swivel in particular was something they remembered, and the fact that it had the mother of pearl pistol grips. So they identified it as having been George Wellman's, and it ended up coming into the museum collection, a number of years later.
But as a gun historian, for guns at the time, the combination of the factory nickel job, as well as those mother of pearl grips, as well as that the lanyard loop on the bottom of the grip, those during that time frame on that model of Colt were not common, especially in an area like the middle of Wyoming.
Right.
For something like that, you wouldn't have had the lanyard loop. You probably would have had either the wood or the Bakelite grip panels. I mean, it probably would have been just a blued gun. So like for me as a gun historian, I tend to be a little bit more, that kind of settles that question. There's less of an issue like where it went and what the length of time on the chain of custody was. So that's,
Right.
yeah, it's good stuff.
We've sent off for the factory letter, and all the date and information about this does line up. I mean, obviously George Wellman didn't order it specifically himself, but it was
Right.
everything lines up for it to fit that provenance. And as a longtime resident of Wyoming, I complain about how dry it is here all the time.
Yep. I was going to comment on that, especially.
That really helped.
Yeah, between keeping the gun in the condition it was, and a lot of people who are watching this right now probably don't understand or appreciate our attention to humidity in a museum setting, and it's like why we get so caught up in what the temperature and the humidity are in the building. And with something like those firearms, you leave that up in the middle of a hillside in a tin can in Wyoming, and it's the same reason why that gun is in almost perfect condition is because it was like 5% humidity for that 20-30 year period. And whereas all of the paper scraps in there, I would bet that the paper scraps fell apart again because it was only about 5% humidity. And paper materials is like why in a lot of archives your humidity is going to be at least 50%, if not higher, just to make sure that the paper stays good. So it goes back to a collections issue on that part as well.
Yeah, we only see 50% humidity in Wyoming when it's actually raining.
Yeah, it drops from that high humidity back down to about 5% very quickly. Well, I think that we've had a great conversation today about the Johnson County War, about Frank Canton, the Barling brothers who were involved in the Regulators or Invaders. We also have good stuff about George Wellman and what happened with him as the only Deputy U.S. Marshal. While everybody there had been, like the names we've talked about, have been associated with or being Deputy Marshals at one point or another. Frank Canton, while he was in charge of the Regulators, had been kind of running around as part of that. George Wellman killed while he was working as a deputy marshal, the Barling brothers having been deputies prior to this. But I think it's just some really good stories that we've had a chance to talk about. And I know we had one question earlier, Mike Sheriff online. He asked if we could talk about Joe Horner, aka Frank Canton, and his involvement in the Johnson County War. I went ahead and I let him know online. That's why I was typing away a little bit earlier that we did talk about him earlier, and after the presentation is over, you can replay this whole presentation back at your leisure and get a chance to catch part of that, stop and start. And if you want to freeze frame on what George Wellman's revolver looked like, you can do stuff like that, as well as on any of the photographs that were shown by Sylvia during this. If anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to, we can take care of those, whether it is a question for Sylvia up in Buffalo, Wyoming, or whether it's for me down here at the Marshals Museum. We are just fine looking for those. I see that there's been between 15 and 25 people watching at any given time during the course of this. And if I can drag this out a little bit and plug the museum, and then and Bob Ernst, former individual associated with the museum, is mentioning 2 books on the subject, Alias Frank Canton, written by Bob Darment, and Johnson War by Bill O'Neill. Wellman is currently buried in Bay City, Michigan, and his information on him, he has a very good write-up in the book Deadly Affrays, The Violent Deaths of U.S. Marshals, written by Bob Ernst, and you can find that book on Amazon and some other places. We are, if there's anybody that has a question about any of this, I would be more than happy to see where we want to go. Otherwise, as a reminder, the Marshals Museum is still continuing to do art development work. We are still fundraising towards our exhibits. The building is built and it's here, and we cannot wait to let people back in to see all the wonderful stuff that we have. But we are continuing to look at doing our fundraising. We have a buy a brick campaign, so you can get a brick that's going to go out up by where the statue that's going to be commemorating the light horse from the 5 tribes, where that's going to be situated on our property a little bit later this year. We are also we have a number of other different fundraising activities and events going on. So by all means, please continue to take a look at what we have. Stay on with our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We try to keep up with all of the different socials just to keep people aware of what we have going on, not just with us, but with Marshals history. We very definitely, I know that the Gatchell up in Buffalo is busy with some different things of their own. What's the newest thing that you guys have going on right now? I believe you guys just reopened, didn't you?
We reopened on May 1st. I think we were one of the earliest museums in our area to open. We're under the county structure, so we were given our marching orders to do that, and we did. And we're happy to see people again. It's been a very strange year. So we are working on some new exhibits. We do try to rotate exhibits, and we also have one gallery that we change out every couple of years or so. And so we have a focus on kind of some early businesses in Buffalo. We have a small exhibit on our swimming pool here. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek type of exhibit with some swimsuits from the 40s from local people. And an exhibit about the woman who created our state flag. Her name was Verna Keyes. Those are all new this year. And you mentioned books, and I forgot, I brought a couple of my favorite books. The Johns County War by Bill O'Neill is definitely one of my favorites. He's got a good bit of information about the Barlings. And Wyoming Range War by John W. Davis is another excellent book. I reference these two all the time. Okay.
And then I thought you had did you have a third book there earlier? I thought I saw you with?
About the Banditti of the Plains.
Oh, Banditti of the Plains, yes. That was, yes. From what I understand, that was the first book that was written immediately following all of these events.
Yep, and I think it was maybe the 4th or 5th edition, something like that. He started to include in the back of the book the confession of George Dunning. So while we have the original document here and we're really geeked out that we have it, you can get that content anytime by just getting a copy of the Banditti Plains by Asa Mercer.
Yep. Awesome. Well, we haven't really gotten any questions in, so I just wanted to thank everyone, though, who had a chance to stop in, and thank everybody who came in and took part in this conversation. Again, if you don't already follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, go ahead and do all of that. Keep up with us. We've got on July 6th, we are going to be doing the third and final in our lecture series on civility in America right now, and building civility, something I think we can all appreciate as a subject that is very important to us right now, personally, locally, and as well as a nation. So you might want to throw that on your schedules. We're going to start really pushing the daylights out of that on our socials, so you can catch that. That's going to be live on our YouTube channel on July 6th. And so we are going to be doing that very much like we're doing this. That individual, because of different reasons, is not going to be traveling here. We will be talking to them from their location on the East Coast, and they will be broadcast across to our YouTube channel. And so we're really looking forward to that. If you want to catch the previous 2 lectures, those are both currently on our YouTube channel and in their entirety, so you can get a chance to see those and get a flavor for what we've got going on. We've got Mike Sheriff online again. Thank you both very much. Mike, thank you for popping in. Thank Bob for popping in. We're just always glad to see people taking part in the discussions here at the museum. And Sylvia, thank you very much for coming in and spending an hour on your Friday. I know that part of it you sucked into your lunch period, and just kind of helping us out so we can learn more about the Marshal Service, more about that history, and more about what it is you guys are doing up there. I had a great time in Buffalo visiting your museum just over a year ago, and we never knew then what was going to be going on today. So thank you very much for showing up, and thank you to everybody else. And if Sylvia, if you had any last words?
Just thank you for having us and for putting this together. I'm amazed at some of the things that have kind of come out of this whole coronavirus situation and some of the cool programs that people have done. And thanks for letting us participate. This has been fun.
Thank you very much. And everybody else, thank you very much for popping in and catching us here on our Facebook channel, our Facebook Live. And we are going to be here again next week. And I've got a couple of different ideas for what's going to be coming up in the future. And we'll probably have some more conversations like this. If there's something that you want to see here on our Facebook Talks on Friday afternoon, please go ahead and contact us through the page. We're more than happy to take into consideration anything you guys have to suggest. And I look forward to seeing you next Friday. Thank you.